So this is the Hasselblad X2D 100C. It's a medium format, high fidelity, 100 megapixels professional stills camera. Whereas this is the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, one of the best smartphone cameras of the year. So I thought it would be so interesting to put these two cameras head to head. I've tested them in a variety of situations, from model photo shoots to landscapes, and some of the results may just surprise you. So first things first, you may have noticed that I'm obviously in a new space. It's different from the last setup. I've actually just very excitingly bought a house, so clearly settling in here. I'm sorry for the probably slight echo because the office is not set up, but let's get back to talking about these cameras. First things first, I want to talk about the Hasselblad X2D 100C. Why is this camera so expensive, and why do professionals continue to pay this money for a camera system like this? It's worth thinking about Hasselblad a little bit like the Ferrari of the camera world. If you're looking for the best of the best when it comes to pure image quality, there's a good chance that Hasselblad may be the right answer for that. Unlike a lot of other camera brands which add lots of bells and whistles to their camera systems to almost like help you take the best photos possible, Hasselblad's main focus is actually the image quality. It's wanting you to be able to take pixel for pixel the best image possible and have the best experience while doing so. And the S25 Ultra, however, is of course a smartphone. It does a whole load of other things. Taking photos isn't its main focus, but it does have a 200 megapixel main rear-facing sensor. It has 4 lenses directly on the back. If you were to buy the same lenses in terms of focal ranges on this, it would cost you probably upwards of $20,000 over on the Hasselblad system. So in terms of versatility, the S25 Ultra has a lot to offer. And when we're talking about lenses, I actually only have one lens right now for the Hasselblad X2D. It is a 38mm focal range, which on a medium format sensor actually gives it a focal range equivalent of about 30mm. So that's kind of the range which I'm testing in this video. I'm not going to touch the other lenses on the S25 Ultra. We're mainly just going to be using the main rear-facing sensor. It's about that 24mm, so this will be slightly more zoomed out than the Hasselblad, but it's also the highest quality lens available on the Samsung, so that will give us the best chance at kind of creating the best image comparisons. I want to jump straight into Lightroom to show off some of these comparisons because I think it's a really interesting way just to see how different these files actually are. So as you can see, we're in Lightroom here, and I've set these files up so we go from one camera to the next, one camera to the next. So first off, we're going to have a look at this image here. And this is intentional because smartphones perform very, very well in certain use cases now. Things like landscapes, as you can see. So this is just a classic kind of landscape sunset shot. And you can see that that is the smartphone version. And they're pretty similar, to be honest, on the whole. I think the most noticeable will be if you decide to zoom in. The Hasselblad still looks fantastic here, as you can tell. Whereas if we crunch in on the Samsung, you can see that you are seeing some of that over sharpening and some of the kind of artifacting that is pretty typical of smartphone cameras. But on the whole, when you zoom out, the Samsung has actually done really, really well here. However, let's have a look at some of the model shots. And this is really where the Hasselblad is going to come into its own. So this is a Hasselblad image. And as you can see, there's a gorgeous focus roll off. You can just see that the shallow depth of field that we're getting in the background, the image here, things like the skin tones and colors are just absolutely gorgeous. One thing definitely to note is that on the Hasselblad, if you don't totally nail focus, because it is such a high resolution camera, you are going to immediately be able to tell. Like you can see that this eye is not completely tack sharp here, but it just shows you how high fidelity these cameras are. So that, in my opinion, gorgeous, gorgeous image. Let's go across to the Samsung. You can see that things aren't bad here, but you can see there is a noticeable difference. This is why people are paying money for these cameras. First off, there's a few things that the Samsung literally cannot replicate, and that's like the depth of field in the background. You're not going to get such a smooth roll off to an out of focus area, as you can see. Things like the skin tones are actually pretty good on the Samsung, but you can see the artifacting over here. This is very typical of smartphone blur. Let's move on to another image here. So this, as you can see, again, a really, really nice image. I have actually on some of these, for instance, like let's show you. I'm going to reset this image entirely. This is the original straight out of camera. We'll put a profile correction on, and you can see how much data there is to recover in these highlights. So let's dim this right down. You can see that that sky is now looking really nice, but obviously our subject is very, very dim. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Lightroom, choose a subject isolator. We can boost that up without making it look too artificial here. Head back to the kind of main corrections, and you can see that that is already looking quite substantially better. If we go over to the Samsung image here, one thing to note is that you can see that Samsung was really wanting the scene to be quite warm, which is quite interesting. So we could drag that temperature down to almost like match the Hasselblad a little bit better here. I've actually pulled back some of these shadows as well, because again, with smartphones, they're wanting maximum exposure. They really want the scene to be well exposed all over, whereas that's not actually a look that professionals tend to want to get. Doing the same thing on the Hasselblad here. Let's pull down some of the exposure here. We'll pull down the highlights. That's looking a lot better. Add a subject isolator again. Maybe we don't want this to be quite so stark, but there we go. Things are looking a lot nicer on that image now, but you can see if we zoom into the face, you can just see how much detail is being lost, even in Samsung Expert Pro RAW, which is their kind of high fidelity raw file image capture. Things are really artificially smoothed, as you can see, and there's some really funky things going on in her skin here, and that's just not the case on the Hasselblad. Let's go to the next image here. Let's zoom out. You can see, so I've played around with this image quite a bit in terms of colors. This one was probably one of my favorite images from the set. If I was using this in a professional capacity, I would probably retouch her hair, but I'm not going to do that for the sake of this video. But you can see things are looking really gorgeous here, in my opinion. So first of all, we can just zoom in and see how tack sharp everything is. Obviously, when you zoom that far in, because of the resolution on the Hasselblad, you are going to be seeing some color noise, but then as soon as you zoom out, that's instantly fixed. So let's zoom out here. Pretty much everything here, from the skin tones to the roll off into the background to the detail that you're getting in the shot, is just really, really gorgeous. If we move over to the Samsung, this is again one of those areas where you are just not going to see like for like in terms of capability between the two cameras, even when you're shooting with like a 38mm lens on the Hasselblad. The biggest difference for me is the focus roll-off look in the background here. Things are just nowhere near as blurred. This looks like a smartphone image to me. And again, another one, if we zoom in, there's a lot of processing going on in the skin, whereas on the same level of zoom, that is just night and day, in my opinion. So let's talk about highlight and shadow recovery. How much data is actually available in these Hasselblad files? Each photo, each RAW file taken with this camera system ends up being about 200 megabytes in terms of size. Now, you might see that as a downside, but for a lot of people, for working professionals, that's going to be a massive, massive advantage. So taking this image here, you can see that I've got two images. You'll probably not tell right off the rip which image is which, because they are relatively similar, as you can see. But as soon as we just apply a profile correction to the Hasselblad image, and let's boost up the exposure. Now I'm just doing this to demonstrate how much data is available in these files. So we will boost the shadows here, and you can actually see a little bit more in the highlights. Dim down these highlights ever so slightly. Obviously, if you zoom in, you are going to be seeing some color noise because the original looked like that. But look how much data is available in that file. That is genuinely incredible. If we do the same on the Samsung, you are actually going to get a fair bit of data here, but it is going to break down very, very dramatically. So let's dim the highlights. Let's boost up those shadows, but you can see that this is essentially all, anything up kind of below this sort of level, you're getting a bit more exposure up here, but this is all now not usable. If we zoom over, that is a significant difference in terms of the data capacity and the amount that it allows you to recover in terms of these files. This image as well is another good example of this. I obviously shot this image darker, as you can see, but after applying the kind of processing that I would expect to use on an image like this, you can see the amount of exposure boost with essentially zero noise added to the image. That again is one of the main advantages about shooting with such a high kind of detail-rich camera. I think sometimes what's very, very important is the differences between sharpness and smoothness when we're talking about high-end photography. And it's because images created on a system like the Samsung Galaxy S25 Ultra, smartphones in general, they're created to be instantly shareable and instantly good looking straight out of camera. And that's not really the case for images shot with a camera like the Hasselblad. They're expecting photographers to really work on this file and produce something which is kind of heavily considered and heavily thought about. When you actually shoot on the Samsung, you can see that there is a clinical sharpness that is very, very difficult to get away from, and that is just not the case on the Hasselblad's images. Something which I actually don't think is talked about enough on the Hasselblad X2D is just its ergonomics. This is a beautiful camera to use. It feels so physical and so sturdy. It's a basically full metal construction. You have absolutely no issues. If you're wanting to take photos, it's just a very tangible experience, probably more so than any camera system that I've actually owned or used before. I do have to admit, as someone who takes a lot of smartphone photos, this is just a restriction with smartphone photography in general. It is not very fun in terms of the actual process of taking images with smartphones. Given the choice, I will always choose a camera over it. And in terms of cameras, this is pretty much the best one in terms of a photography experience that I've ever shot with. One small caveat to that though is that I actually tend not to use autofocus on this system, as it does sometimes miss focus, and I found that to be kind of quite frustrating. The manual focusing experience is very, very good though. They have got good manual focus kind of controls and assistance to enable you to get really nice crisp shots almost every time. And one advantage again on something like a smartphone is you're pretty much not going to have that as an issue. The automatic systems available on smartphones are basically going to be able to create almost perfect images every single time you shoot. And so there we have it. Which one are you choosing?